They're going to need better individual defenders, and Kuminga, we'll see. He's been that at times of his career. He also hasn't been. I worry about him as a help defender, but I do think in lineups, which he hasn't played in yet, that have Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green behind him, if they just point and shoot him at a target, which would be a good perimeter score, there's a chance he could develop into a good individual defender, and I think they really need that.
Let's dive into this a little bit further to see where the Warriors are at on all things on Willard and Dibs, and then we'll get back to your calls at 888-957-9570. Let's bring Slater in, our Warrior insider, The Athletic. Anthony, what's going on, man? How are you?
What's up, fellas? How are you?
We're doing good and talking this out, and certainly would love your perspective. To what level are the Warriors in the mindset of if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Because things are working pretty well right now.
Yeah, I mean, like Jonathan Kuminga is going to play a role when he gets back. And they can mask it as minutes restriction, which, I say mask it like he should come back. Should probably come back and play 22 or something like that in his first couple games back. But he's not going to get zero. They're not just going to, keep the same rotation that they have. He's going to eat into Guy Santos' minutes. He's going to eat into some of Moses Moody's minutes. He's going to maybe, nibble away from Draymond and post and some of that because we'll see if that does. He's going to have to play himself back into a 30 to 34 minute per night type role, and that may never happen, or that may not happen this year. But he's not going to not roll.
What does he do best that this team is currently missing? And I say currently, like ever since Jimmy Butler has arrived on the scene, what's the one thing that Jonathan can bring that this team is currently lacking?
Yeah, I mean, you still need more guys that can score at the rim and score at the rim with force. I still think that's this team's flaw. I mean, in their the one loss that they have had with Jimmy Butler, I thought that was a big issue, in that game at Dallas. And even in times when they're succeeding, they're small and they're still kind of unathletic. And I do think teams with rim protectors or teams that can wall off the paint and make some of these finishes harder, or, sag off guys and force these guys into floaters or contested layups. The Warriors don't have a lot of great finishers at the rim. They now have one better one with Butler, but they need more. So that's what Kuminga does. And then I think the ceiling of this team has a locked-in defensive version of Jonathan Kuminga, particularly on ball. I still do think at their worst at times in Philadelphia, I know they didn't have Butler that night, but Butler's not, you don't want him to be a primary 30-minute per night guy. They got cooked by Quentin Grimes repeatedly, and I think that's part of their point of attack issue, that I do think against the best scorers in the league in the playoffs, they're going to need better individual defenders, and Kuminga, we'll see. He's been that at times of his career. He also hasn't been. I worry about him as a help defender, but I do think in lineups, which he hasn't played in yet, that have Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green behind him, if they just point and shoot him at a target, which would be a good perimeter score, there's a chance he could develop into a good individual defender, and I think they really need that.
Anthony Slater is with us, The Athletic, our Warrior insider, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Anthony, especially because you cover the rest of the league too, I'm curious, with this new look Warrior team, what are the matchups that might still be bad for them in the Western Conference?
Oklahoma City. I think they're bad for everybody. I think people are, wanting to not fear the Thunder that much because they haven't proven it before. But I think they're a very well-constructed team that, kind of shaved past some of their flaws that we saw last year. They got Josh Giddey off the roster. They got Hartenstein so they can kind of play bigger lineups. And I think that's a tough matchup, like I said, for anyone. And if the Warriors do get up into that 4-5 and win a 4-5 matchup, that's who would be sitting there for them in round two. As far as who they might play in the first round, Denver, like Nikola Jokic against Draymond Green, or, they can't play the Draymond Green, Kevon Looney lineups, right? They've given that up. That you can go back to 2022 where they went through a limited version of the Nuggets in the first round, and that's who they were starting that time. And I think when you had Looney and Draymond kind of, comboing on the floor at the same time against Jokic, that was a better defensive pairing to try to hold him back. But they don't have that anymore. They can't play those two together. So that, to me, is the matchup you probably don't want the most in the first round is Denver.
Can you afford to go with a Post and Draymond center combination? And because clearly TJD is no longer in the rotation, does this pose a bigger problem with the viability of having to play Quentin Post a lot of minutes in the playoffs?
I mean, offensively, you would love to go with the Draymond Post combination because, like, that really helps Draymond, a stretch center, which he very often hasn't had out there. But if we're talking, are you asking specifically in a Denver matchup?
Yeah, really for Denver, and I guess OKC is going to be a problem no matter who you put out there.
Yeah, so OKC, they started Post, and the Thunder just dragged him into SGA action, like, repeatedly, and SGA had, like, 21 in the first quarter, and they didn't start him in the second half. They almost couldn't play him. So you worry about him in that matchup for that reason. And then in the Denver matchup, Quentin Post is not Kevon Looney defensively. You do not want him on Nikola Jokic. So I would be concerned about him in that matchup. Now, I think part of the reason you see Quentin Post a lot of times open second and fourth quarters is because they like to get him on the floor when the star scorer is typically off the floor. Nikola Jokic, for example, typically is off the floor to start the second and fourth quarter. So I think you'll see him in those pockets of the game in those particular matchups.
Anthony Slater with us here. Hey, back to Kuminga. What the hell's going on? Like, come on.
Yeah.
What's going on? What is taking so long? Something's up.
I'll tell you. He on the road trip. The soft target I had been hearing was Charlotte, which was the middle of that road trip, the third game. He had he'd been playing 3-on-3 scrimmage and all that after Philly. And again, it's not like I'm just getting fed as much detailed information from the medical side. I have to go with what I see, and what I saw after a workout in Philly was, the ankle seemed to be bothering him. He was kind of grimacing, holding it a little bit, and talking to the training staff. And then later that night, I entered the locker room and he's got his foot in an ice bucket. He did not play that night, but he was icing his foot post game, his ankle, we should say. And, there's been some residual swelling, and, Steve Kerr's kind of talked about it. They want him to feel his full burst considering how he plays. And, again, I had heard the soft target after that was Charlotte. That was right before this workout, or right after this workout I'm talking about. They didn't greenlight him for Charlotte. They hadn't greenlighted him the rest of the trip. And, from my understanding, you're very likely to see him soon. I could definitely see it Thursday night after these 2 off days. He gets in maybe a full practice Wednesday when the team should get in a full practice. I think you might see him Thursday. It has taken longer than they hoped it would, but it's not like there's some type of setback where they've shut him down. He's still scrimmaging. He's still doing 3-on-3s. He's still getting closer. It's just, if you want to consider it a setback or not, I would say it's probably been pushed back a week longer than they thought it would.
Have you gotten any sense for his eagerness or his, maybe feeling not the contract pressure, but just the overall wantonness to get back out on the court and, show the organization again who he was before he got hurt?
Yeah, I mean, I chatted with him briefly after the Brooklyn game. You could tell he's like, he's very hopeful of getting back in enough time with the runway. You mentioned maybe the word anxiousness. I mean, they're playing so well. He wants to be a part of it. He also, he left at a strange time where it was probably like, the best 6-game stretch of his career. It felt like he was finally getting, a runway and a role that he wanted. He was getting praised, by Steve Kerr, and then he disappeared for a while. And I think that's part of what's going on here is he wants his body to feel 100% right. He doesn't want to come back as a rusty version of himself or a limited version of himself. And then suddenly, what are we talking about? If he struggles his first 2 games and Guy Santos is playing well, what's the radio segments? What are we writing about? What are the post-game press conferences going to be about? We all know that. He knows that. And then you add into that what you mentioned in the question, like the contract situation, understandably, is obviously, looming over the top of all this.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. What do you think has happened with the contract situation, and how are the Warriors going to play it?
It's restricted free agency, so they hold a level of, team control here. It's some of it I'm sure is going to depend on not only how he plays, but how the team finishes their season, because Joe Lacob has been very outwardly confident that they're willing to pay Jonathan Kuminga long term, the type of value that he wants and that, he'll command on the market. But for them to commit as much money as that would mean to, Kuminga plus Butler, Draymond, Steph, that's going to take them up towards second apron territory. And I think they're only willing to do that if this looks like a core 4 that's like a contender. And I don't think we're going to know that until April, May, June this year. So if they win, and he's a big part of winning, he's going to get, probably somewhat near his max, which his max is only like 38-ish per year next year, or 38 as a starting salary. But if he struggles, if his role is limited, if they flame out in the first round and it doesn't look like a core that you want to, pay, an exorbitant luxury tax fee for moving forward, then I think there is going to be a lot deeper conversations, not only about Kuminga's future, but about the future of like all the big salary pieces on this team.
Yeah, and you get the three big ones you mentioned, and plus, quietly Moses jumps up to 11.5, and Buddy's making a clean 9 and change, and so those all start to add up as you get into those constrictive aprons. But when you look at this team, Anthony, over the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks since Jimmy has come, is the viability of them making a run, is it becoming more and more real, or is it just, those of us who are super fans trying to put too much into this?
Both, all. I mean, clearly they're better than I thought they would be. I think they're better than anybody, even probably internally they believed they would. Because if they knew Jimmy Butler would make this type of impact, probably would have made the trade earlier, right?
Right.
And probably wouldn't have flirted with Kevin Durant and otherwise, because at this point, this looked like the perfect move, and I'm not sure they all knew that at this point. But, I'm not ready to looking at who they play and limited stretches still as well. Sure, the profile of this 12-game stretch, when you look at offensive rating, defensive rating, that screams title contender. Too small of a sample against too poor of a group of opponents. They still have no Boston games, no Cleveland games, no Oklahoma City games. And by the way, we're not going to see them play those three the rest of the year. I'm not ready to just declare them in that group. So anybody that's saying they're going to win the championship, you're either Draymond Green or I think you're still maybe slightly, certainly a lot more threatening than they were, much more.
Okay, well, hold on. Let's dig into that. Do you still think the idea of title contention for the Warriors is crazy?
Yeah, but maybe that's just part of me, just like not wanting to believe straight rounds of it. Is like when I see what Cleveland is, when I see what Cleveland is doing to teams, when I see what Boston can do to teams, Oklahoma City, when I know what Jokic and that Denver team when fully stocked is, but by saying I still don't believe in it, because I probably didn't believe in it going into the 2022 playoffs, and you go back to that March when they had lost, they had that hot start in 22, 18-2, I think it was, stretch, that they had lost. I'm just kind of ballparking it here, but they're maybe like 7-17 over a 24-game stretch. And I was definitely like, oh, this team is nowhere near title contention. And they didn't even make a big midseason trade to change the team.
Right.
So sure, outside chance. What is like percentage chance, right? I think Daryl Morey's whole thing is if you have a 5% chance, you go for it. 5% feels like reasonable to say they have. So then, yeah, I guess they're an outside title threat.
Okay, what if now that's asking your opinion, but you had said a minute ago, like if you think they can win, you're either Draymond Green or a big super fan. Do you think that they believe that they can win? I
think that the way they've talked, it's more, get us in a series with one of these guys that, Anthony Slater says that they don't have a shot against the Thunder, whatever, whatever pundit says that. And if they can steal one of those first two on the road and then suddenly it's 1-1 back in Chase Center for a game 3 and we're all like, look, they might be the favorites in this series. Like, to me, they're talking more like series to series. But yeah, like, I think Draymond Green, deep in his heart, believes there's not a team out there that could beat this team 4-7. I've known Jimmy Butler now for 2-3 weeks. He thinks similarly. He has a very Draymond Green mindset of get them on a playoff floor and you're not going to beat them 4 out of 7 times. Steph Curry, certainly, if he's hot, at the right time. Maybe you're talking me into it. I don't know. But yes, they believe that they're a bigger threat than I probably do.
What have you made of Jimmy Butler and his arrival in terms of just the locker room and the vibes and what he's brought to the team, mostly off the court?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like an assertiveness, confidence level, which you've seen. The IQ is probably something that wasn't being mixed in enough. Like, it's the supercharged version of the stuff that Steve Kerr loves, right? When he plays a lot of these players, even Guy Santos right now, it's like, because, he's a connector. He cuts well. He does this. Well, Jimmy Butler does all that in like a superstar 6'7" body. And that just that do everything game, that ability to kind of mold into what a particular game needs, be super physical, get downhill, pass well. I think there's going to be moments in the playoffs where they're getting killed in a point of attack situation, and they're going to go, hey, Jimmy Butler, use your energy right now for the next 5 minutes, guarding Luka Doncic for 5 minutes, guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and he'll just suddenly turn into their point of attack defender, where you don't want that for 25 minutes every night, but his ability to kind of do everything, really, I think bumps this team's, ceiling upward in so many ways, because on any given night, he'll just be what they need.
Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. Any concerns with a young but kind of getting better Portland team tonight?
Well, you said it, kind of getting better. So
yeah.
Sure, I'll say I saw the line was like 12. I think I was like, oh, that's a little high. They've won some games. They've threatened. I think Denny Avdija is questionable. He's kind of a quietly important piece for them. So if he doesn't play tonight, that's a blow for them. But yeah, it could be challenging. Portland could certainly stay in this game.
Anthony, great stuff, man. Thank you so much.
All right, fellas.
Okay, Anthony Slater, The Athletic, joining us on Willard and Dibs.